Alright, everyone. So it's me again. Luke chapters 8 and 9. Loads of stuff going on. Loads. Let's just list it out to begin with. Parable of the Sower. Jesus' mother and brothers. Jesus calming a storm. Jesus healing the Gerasene demoniac. Jesus raising Jairus' daughter from the dead. Jesus feeding the 5,000. The Transfiguration. Like all kinds of mad stuff. And I even left bits out there. So let's just dive right in. Parable of the Sower. Really simple reading of it because of my simple brain. I just love this because it talks about Jesus being a generous sower, God being a generous sower, even sowing into the hard places, places where there's not going to be that much of a return. And actually that's where we're called to go. We're called to go to the difficult places. Often there's a bit of a trend to move to maybe a more peaceful area to do the more sort of easy thing, go the easy route in life. I think Jesus asks of us maybe to do what some commentators would say is the great reversal. Go to those difficult places, go to the harder places, the harder situations, actually, because it requires more faith that God is present, that God has already sown seeds there, that he's up to something good. I think that's what this is about. Trust that wherever God has called you, wherever you are heading to, whatever situation you're in, God is up to something good. He has sown seeds. Trust that wherever you go, even when it's difficult. It's really hard, but I think that's core to this parable in my reading of it anyway. Let's skip some of the bits and go straight to Jesus calming a storm. Everyone always talks about, oh, he's asleep on a boat. He's asleep on a boat. Would he even be asleep during a pandemic? You know, that's probably the classic equivalent, isn't it? Maybe he would find time to carve out rest. Would Jesus be scouring the headlines of newspapers? No one reads newspapers anymore, but you know what I mean. Would Jesus be scouring the internet for the very latest news on COVID-19? Would he be checking and refreshing pages on his web browser constantly, again and again and again, out of anxiety? No, he wouldn't. He would carve out a time of rest. He would carve out good space to rest, even in the midst of panic, even in the midst of chaos. And the seas in biblical language, right the way through, always represent chaos and death. That is what their metaphor is. That's what they represent to a lot of the readers, the ancient readers. And here Jesus is asleep, first of all, while all this chaos is going on around, this storm whipping up the waves around him. And then when he rebukes the storm, some commentators even say it's the same way that he would rebuke something that is demonic, something that is evil. And there's this idea that even creation itself is turned and rebelled against its creator in some way, which is really fascinating. I don't know any more to talk about it anymore in any more detail, but there's something about the way Jesus tells it to calm. He's not like, oh, just, calm down, mate. He rebukes the storm. He tells it to shut up. Like, shut up, storm. Do one. And there's something about that that's really interesting about how even creation itself may be rebelling against its creator. And even he has command over it. Not only that, but it represents how he has command over death and chaos itself. He is Lord over that too. So much so that he's asleep when all the madness is happening. He's not even worked up or afraid. I think that's pretty encouraging in the midst of all this, where it's just really easy to go down rabbit holes of conspiracy theories. What's coronavirus caused by? Who did it? Is it these people? Is it that? Oh, there's so many different things we can do that are unhelpful and untrue. And even if they are true, Jesus is Lord over that too. That's the point of this story. That's what Luke's trying to get across. He's trying to tell the readers of this gospel account. Jesus is powerful. He's more powerful than your emperor, writing to the Roman citizens, the Roman soldiers, whoever picked up this and read it, whoever heard it being read out. But also that he's bigger than chaos, bigger than death, bigger than COVID-19, bigger than all our anxieties and worries. We can trust in him. And then it gets ramped up a bit more. We've got the healing of the Gerasene demoniac. I love this story because it's crazy. Really, it's a political cartoon in one part. You notice how the word legion, it's quite specified. Jesus asks for the name of the demons that possessed this man in the story, and they say legion. Well, a legion was, you could also almost use the word regiment. It was a group of Roman soldiers, and you might have heard that a million times over, but that's really significant. And he drives this legion into a herd of pigs seen as unclean, and then those pigs run into the sea. It's like Jesus, the true King of Israel, in Luke's Gospel, sending legion back into the sea, for this is where the Roman armies would have attacked from the sea as well as on land, and he's sending them back from where they came from as Israel's true king, driving them out in one part. And the other part, there could even be a sense of, these pigs would have brought great economic benefits to the community. It's farming, they would have been worth something, and he just drives them all into the sea. Well, the demons drive them all into the sea. And it could even be a sense of, I'm not sure I agree with this entirely, but I've read some bits of how it could be Jesus' judgment on the area for neglecting the vulnerable. This man was just caught, wrapped up in chains, hanging around tombs. If you ever read anything in the Old Testament to do with law, being near death and around death was seen as unclean. And that's not a moral category. It's not to say you're morally bad. You be clean and unclean. That's just regular week, really. You might be unclean one day, you do a ceremonial thing and a ritual, and then you're clean and you're ready to do these other things. Really, it's all about, are you ready for worship? Are you ready to be in that mindset? Do you see space and time as being sacred in some way within this when it comes about? Otherwise, you wouldn't go to play football in a full tuxedo and dinner jacket and shiny shoes. You're just not wearing the right stuff. You're not respecting the game. You're not respecting the teammates. You've clearly not. You're not prepared in any way, mentally, physically, emotionally, or spiritually. And it's a bit like that with the categories of clean and unclean. So hanging around with death all the time, he was unclean just through and through and through. The community just banished him, didn't want to know anything about him. They tried to sort him out. He was violent and aggressive and strong. But it seems that Jesus at the end not only drives the demons out, but that tries to make this guy take root again in his community, be a part of his community again, which would have been really hard for them, actually. And it doesn't tell you how it works out in the long run. Then we see him healing Jairus' daughter from death, like raising her from the dead. And there's a real parallel here with Elijah and what Elijah does in 1 Kings 17. Have a read of it. And there's something in this. And again, you might get bored of all this stuff. I get really excited by it. There's a parallel here of Luke as a writer trying to say that what Jesus is doing is echoing what the God of Israel, fulfilling what the God of Israel has been doing over time, fulfilling what the prophets have been doing, which is usually represented in Elijah quite strongly, as he was like the first of the prophets. He did some crazy stuff in the stories. Then we get the feeding of the 5,000. There's loads in that to get excited about. The main thing for me is that we see he's so subtle, just so subtle. You don't see him stand up on a podium. He's not like a performing magician and then sprinkling his hands and suddenly bread and fish pour out of the baskets. No, he asks what they have. What do you have? Not what can you get, not what can you afford. What do you have right now? And it's just 5 loaves, 2 fishes. And that is what is spread about. And that's a young boy's lunch. It's just shared around. And the way it's done is that it just, the baskets keep going. Again, it's not spectacular, apart from in hindsight. That for me suggests that there's a sense that in God's economy, there's enough for everyone. There's always enough for everyone. There's always a seat at the table for you. You always have enough. You can be content with what you have, and you can be strong with what you have. You can help others with what you've got, even if you don't think it's enough, whether that's food, whether that's your character, whether that's, your spirituality, your faith. It's always enough, because it's not about how strong you are or how much you've got. It's about how much he has and how much he can use and do with what you've got, and that's very different. Right, finally, loads more to get through, but let's focus on the transfiguration very quickly. Again, this hints at the Old Testament, the God of Israel, and the story of the Old Testament, the story of Israel being brought to its fulfillment. I think that's what Luke's trying to talk about in this bit. And Elijah's there, and Moses is there. And actually, this is about Jesus is summing up and fulfilling all the law and the prophets. The law represented by Moses, the prophets represented by Elijah. He's summing up that whole story. That whole story is finding its climax, its crescendo in Jesus. It's like the finale of a film. I was thinking about Avengers Endgame, but no spoilers, even though it's old now. But there's a climactic scene. I think this is hinting at that climactic scene. It's saying he is the fulfillment of all of this stuff, all of this experience, all of these stories, all of the things that you have seen and heard and read, been passed down, all of the tradition, all of the rites and rituals, everything being fulfilled in this person. He is now the place, like in Exodus and Leviticus, like the tabernacle, the place where heaven and earth met again, which is what Eden was supposed to be, what the creation poem talks a lot about. And now Jesus is the living tabernacle, so to speak, the living temple, the place where heaven and earth, where God's world and our world are knitted together and meet again. And Luke's story continues from that. And again, no spoilers, but he wrote Acts as a second part to his gospel. And Acts is the next part of how God brings about this knitting together of his world and ours, of heaven and earth, as we call them, as the biblical writers call them, this knitting together of the two places. First, it's Jesus. Then he shares out his spirit to all humanity. And that's where God's world and our world meet now, is in ourselves, through his Holy Spirit, through each one of us. That's exciting, isn't it? It's about new creation. New creation. So there's a lot there. Applicable stuff. Quite simply, trust that God is sowing on difficult ground. If you are really struggling right now, he's still sowing, still scattering seed in all the hard places, still yielding from that sowing. Actually, if your life is chaotic, if you're really racked with anxiety right now, Jesus is calm, and not in a mocking way, but in a strong way. I said in my last video, it talks about how John the Baptist said the stronger one is coming, and this is a sign of the stronger one. He commands the waves and the wind and the storm to stop, and it does. He casts the demons out of the demoniac, and they go. And it's a political statement at the same time of the power he has and carries. He raises Jairus' daughter from the dead, echoes Elijah, the transfiguration. All of this is the sign that he is the stronger one. He is bringing about the fulfillment of all that has been promised and spoken about. And he is the one you can count on, you can lean on. It might seem like he's asleep and he doesn't care. He's not asleep because he doesn't care. He's asleep because he's calm, because he's peaceful, because he carries peace. And so my prayer and my practical sort of application from this would be, seek out his peace, ask for his peace, ask for him to calm the storms, to drive out the evil, the darkness in this world. Trust that he will. He's sowing those seeds. He's still going. There's so many layers of stories here and metaphors. He is the fulfillment of everything good that has been promised. And he still is. He still is. So have faith. Ask him. Ask him and trust. Amen.